Welcome everybody. It's my big pleasure to welcome here Hans Slabbekoorn. He's from the University of Leiden, and he works mainly with the bird song. He started doing this PhD on colored dove, and they explained that what is important to males in colored cooing is the modulation of coos. But then we a little bit switched the topics. He continues to be he now works with environment, how different environment affects songs, and not only songs, because he related also the water environment. So he now also studies fish and how fish responds to, for example, noise that people do. And one of the last papers is predicting the song from the space. So he also related the environmental space. So I'm looking forward to more studies. Now today we're going to hear something about African researches and speciation. So,
thank you very much, Pavel. Thank you for coming. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm enjoying my trip very much. Yesterday and the day before already in Prague, and I got very interested crowds in our work. And indeed, what Pavel said, I've been working now for about 20 years in bioacoustics, and well, I spread into different areas, but also different landscapes over the world, and has always been my pleasure. So today I will talk about soundscapes of the forest and go into detail about signal evolution, especially for birds, and what that may have to do with speciation. So you heard already a quite nice recording, it's run all the time. But if you think of any habitat here in the Czech Republic or anywhere, they have their own specific soundscapes. And so I had to remember where I was from, but as soon as this bird pops up, I know where I made the recordings. But what you should notice is that, of course, there's abiotic sound sources that determine continuously the level and the spectrum of sound that's present. But also what type of vegetation is there leads to kind of a filtering of the sound sources. So it's not only the biotic, but the abiotic and the anthropogenic sounds. I asked somebody to make some sound now from that side. And this is, so, for example, sound if you're walking up. This was in, I shouldn't tell you, but this picture was, this is my son and my wife in Slovenia. But the recording was actually made in another similar habitat in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, the Swainson situation. But what you hear is the sound originating from both wind sources and the torrents, the rivers there, but it's all distorted because of all the echoes, and it's coming out from the valley into the mountainous area. And then there is this kind of soundscape. Sadly enough, I didn't make the recording myself. But these are of course biotic sound sources, and they cause an enormous amount of noise, and these birds are in there and they're communicating, and they use these sounds to find their partners, to find these juveniles need to find their parents, and there's not only a lot of noise, but transmission-wise, if you're in between these bodies, there's also a lot of filtering going on of what you can hear. So there's a huge variety of sounds. And this is the diversity that we have in the Netherlands, with quite simple forest layers and well, the obvious gradients that is seen there. But you have a huge variety of animal communities in different forest types. If you move, even with you can get subtle changes that leads already to a different animal community, and thereby you hear that you're in a different habitat. And I'm sure that the birds around you, that you can walk into a forest and with your eyes closed, and if you walk back the same route, you really know where you are, because you hear that chip-chap over there, you hear the blackbird singing over there, and that's an easy route, an acoustic route through the forest. So those forests can also be very complex, and then there are many more sound sources. And so obviously the tropical rainforests, they're known for their complexity in terms of the number of animals that are there, but also the number of animals that try to communicate with acoustic signals in such forests are really challenging. And at the same time, it's quite often very dense vegetation, so that has also an impact on what signals do well in such habitat. So that is what these animals have to deal with. They have to fight for acoustic space, they compete with other species, they compete with their own conspecifics, and they need to get a message across, and so they need the intended receivers can't be further than the transmission through the forest allow their signals to go. And so this is these are some recordings I took in Cameroon, and in those days I didn't have the automatic recording sets that I have now. I can just do 24 hours or weeks of recordings, but I was in the forest myself, and every hour I took a little sample in between my recordings. And so this was a sample I took at 7 o'clock, and then you see a spectrum. So this is just a 1 second sample, and here you see the spectrum. You see the particular frequency bands filled with sounds, and if you look at that in subsequent hours, what you then see is that kind of the same band is there, but you see like a stepwise increase, and we attribute to that to temperature changes. That some insects, when they make their sounds, that's temperature dependent. So if it's getting warmer, they sound a little bit higher. The sounds that are always present is relatively quiet here in the lower areas. Sometimes a new species pops up, a very loud cicada species at 11 o'clock, and then all other sounds are washed out. Like also this one is always present throughout the day. You have this one, and you see, well, this is not only an 11 o'clock signal, so it can go on for longer, but especially midday between 10 and 1 o'clock, you have bouts of sounds by this species, and obviously you see there's lots of variety, but it's relatively quiet here in the rainforest relative to high frequency levels, because that's where most of the insects are that make the sounds. Huge variety in landscapes, but also, of course, each species has its own song, and they all have the same requirements. They need to survive, they need to find a partner, and they need to defend territories. They all have, but they all solve it in a different way, quite often acoustically, but they all sound differently. And that may have to do with many different aspects, but then to try to explain the diversity is kind of what I saw as my challenge to, okay, why don't they all have the very simple sounds, and some are very elaborated, others indeed have a simple sound, others they are very low, others are very high. So there's a huge variety, and you see here in plumage as well, but in acoustics especially. And if you try to explain evolution of signals, then you have to think of a number of things. For example, the production apparatus. If you have a big body, you also can have a particular sound better than if you have a small body. The syringe is the sound producing organ of birds, and that has a lot of potential, but it also has limitations of what it cannot do. And the same is true for phylogenetic history. And you can change over evolutionary time, but there will be a delay in some changes. It's not, if you are a winter wren, you do not simply evolve into a raven, not even in the size, but also in the sound patterns that you generate and that have evolved are related to morphology, but also to neurobiology. All sorts of neurobiological patterns may have co-evolved with the morphology. And obviously perceptual sensitivity plays a role. I mean, signals typically evolve within the audible range of a particular species. Sound logical, typically the audible range is wider than the sound range that animals produce. And there may be more sounds that are interesting to a particular species. But if you really are going to look for it, there are birds. There's one example that I know of, that they found out it produces ultrasonic sounds, which they were unable to show by some really detailed auditory response studies, that the bird is not receptive. It's unable to hear them. And they're not an ultrasonic component of an audible component. No, they're really independent warble patterns. And so they were unable to explain that. But that's the exception. And probably all the other 10,000 species of birds, they do match. And the sounds that they make, they can hear. And then there is environmental selection. So that depending on where you are, a particular signal does better, because that's made, that does better in transmission, and you're better able to detect it in the context of your habitat. And that's what I want to focus on. So typically people study this comparing closed forests with more open forests. And then the typical difference is that here the sound has to penetrate through vegetation, branches, trees, leaves, and then there is a frequency-dependent impact. So high frequencies with a small wavelengths, they meet more often surfaces that are of equal size, and then they will be reflected. If you have long wavelengths, they pass through it more easily. And that frequency-dependent transmission is not or less abundant here, so here there is less of that. But here you have more wind impact, and then you get turbidity of the air, and that is also leading to disturbance and distortion of your signal. And what you get here is not only that there's frequency-dependent attenuation, but you also get the reflections that may be coming back in your path of transmission and that you will be able to hear. So to make that clear, I have a recording of a white-crowned sparrow recorded in California. And here you see the sonogram with time and frequency, and here you see the amplitude waves. And so you should know that, for example, it starts off with a whistle, which is one stripe on your sonogram, it's one frequency. But you see that it's pulsated in amplitude as well, so it's often less visible here. You can see it clearly here. And then they have a buzz, and then they have, well, a kind of complex syllable and a number of simple syllables. What's nice here is that they have some contrasting acoustic structure. So you have stripes horizontally, but also vertically. So what I did is I took this one into the, so this is the recording, so this is the bird. And then I took this one through a forest, and then with some frequency-dependent attenuation. And then what you see is that here part of this first part is gone, and the upper half is kind of faded out, and then you see that this pulsating is gone, and see the sound there. Still, well, also the difference is not very clear to us. And that is, I mean, we do that all the time. For example, if in your phone, if you phone people, then there's only a component of the frequencies that we generate is transmitted, but we are perfectly able to hear what somebody's saying. We hardly notice that it is very different. We are used to it. And obviously you're used to the environment as well. The other one is more, I think more impressive in the recording, but it's also happening continuously outside. So I took this bird also in the shower. And so you definitely hear it when you're singing in the shower. Part of that is a phonetic singer in the shower. Then that is because it's sounding better, because you have some echo and it's accumulated. But what you see now is that this note is actually hardly changed in terms of the structure on the sonogram, because all echoes that end up still at your microphone, they are the same frequency, so they accumulate on the same frequency. Whereas if you look at, for example, this, then this is all messed up. So if there's any information in the temporal patterning there, then that may be distorted quite a bit. Whereas if you have sounds like this, they may be less distorted, and actually you may benefit from that because it's just amplifying the same sound that you're already making. So very clear differences. So the history of studying this goes back to the early 70s. Chagri in Africa looked at this, comparing more the rainforest species to more open-habitat species. Had a very nice paper and a long paper and lots of recordings. And also at the same time, Eugene Morton was doing studies in Central America. And this is some figure of his results, where he shows that in the low frequency, in the dense forest, and on the edge, you get species with particular frequency ranges, and here you see the higher frequencies and lower frequencies. and you see that he just counted the number of species. And what you see is that in low forest, you have more low frequency singers, and if you go on the edges, you find more high frequency singers. So it's more open, then you find more high frequency uses. And that maybe has to do with, well, the competition with maybe insects in the forest, or it may have to do with the transmission properties that are worse if it's densely vegetated. More data were reanalyzed a couple of years later by Mike Ryan and Granovitz, because they said, well, yeah, but there may be animal groups, taxa, that were bigger and that are more numerous in dense forests, and therefore bigger is more numerous in forests, and therefore also lower frequency singers are more numerous in forests. And it's also true that if particular groups of species are not necessarily related to the body size, but they're singing low, and they have diversified and speciated in the forest, so you get a phylogenetic confounding variable there in the forest. So that you need to take that into account. They did that, and then they still found that variation was not completely explained by body size and phylogeny, but that there was an impact of the environment on the frequency. So this is another recording now with a sonogram. And what you see is again a frequency band like I started off with during the day, but this is just a few seconds. And when you see that it can go on continuously, and you heard some big turaco in the background. But if you're singing here, then it's not only the transmission, but really also the noise patterns that may, if you're a bird, this is a good frequency range, but if you're trying to sing something here, it's very hard to get yourself across. During my master's, I was in Indonesia, and then we had different houses where the students were housed in, and then there was some kind of a little bit of a scare because people would come, there were ghosts around. You know how it is in Southeast Asia, there are ghosts. And one of the students said, well, it would be nice if we could call each other if there is something. But then we tried. As soon as after 6 it became dark, and then he was standing at his house and it was 20, 30 meters away, and he was shouting. We saw him shouting, but we didn't hear a thing because it was so noisy. And we didn't realize it because it's gradually growing on you, and you habituate to the noise levels. Nothing happened with the ghosts. They don't make sounds anyway. So also in the temperate climate, there were studies done. This is by Budweis and Leiden. And what you see here is habitats, parameters from habitat that is open to more closed. And this is a temporal patterns, and also in the temporal patterns you find things. So they become more slow and less notes if you go to more closed habitats. And again, there is also they took along the impact of body mass. So if you're bigger, you may sound lower and you sing slower with longer, less notes. And the same is true with the habitat. So those patterns are repeatedly found. Well, just recently, 2010, they also looked at more subtle differences between adjacent habitats. This is bamboo forest and terra firma forest in Peru. And they looked at sister species that were occurring in both habitat types. And then you also see that each time you compare these sister species, that in bamboo that is really densely packed bamboo sticks. And you see that every time the sister species in bamboo has a lower frequency than the one that's nearby in more terra firma, which is kind of an open gallery style area. So that was a study by Joseph Tobias. And this is, of course, studies. These were studies with comparisons between species, and then already at an early age, so at the same time that Morton and Chapuis were working on this, they looked at variation within the species. So this is one of the most famous birds to look at dialects and relay those dialects to habitat types. Paul Hanford has done a lot of those. And here you see some examples, desert shrub versus older woodlands. And it was really what this buzz at the end, like how rapid those trills were. And that's a slow trill at the end. And so the more close, the more forested the habitat in which the birds were found, the slower these trill habitats were. And this is really open desert shrub, dry area where you don't have the transmission limitations, but you do have wind turbulence, and so then it's more advantageous to use these rapid trills. They are less affected by that. Okay, so within species you can get variation related to the habitat. And so what does that do? Does that mean that variation within species could also lead to kind of a disruption of recognition? That it's a precursor of species-specific sounds that are a mating barrier to birds of different populations? That was a question that has been around for quite a while. And also this beautiful picture that I made 20 years ago has been around for quite a while. I think I animated it nicely. Like songs, they vary between populations, the same between species. And yes, there it is. So now this bird was coming from this area with this song and it flew in that area, and still there were chicks. But is there, will there be a time that this bird would only come to this side and would not be attracted anymore to songs that are of different populations? So what are the parameters that are important? So do we need any geographic segregation, separation, so that there is time allowed, that gene flow is restricted, that particular selection questions may lead to divergence in other than parameters than song, like physiology or morphology, and then song can play a role, but there needs to be some divergence, or is it indeed already necessary, clear if there is ecological divergence, maybe also on physiology and morphology, but that song may be driven apart in populations that are still adjacent or in preparatory, and thereby driving a speciation event. Well, some studies looking at responses to dialectal variation are, for example, those on the song sparrows by Bill Searcy and collaborators. So what they did is they had one population over here, and they recorded song sparrows from various distances up to, well, what would it be, 800 kilometers or so. And what they did is the recordings they made here, they played them back at Hartstown, and they looked at whether the birds were still responding to that. And they compared it to the local population, and then they went on, is they still there, and until the end. There are many studies like that, but this one is nice because what they did is they looked at both the male responses and the female responses. And that is quite rare because males are easy to work with, everybody knows that, but women typically you don't see them in birds, and if you want to try to get to have a response, it's very difficult. So here you see the result they had for the males, and what you see is that actually there is recognition. They respond equally strongly to birds that still are up to 270 kilometers away, and here you have the furthest population, and suddenly here it's statistically significant, there they respond less strong. So the dialects that are really far away, they have lower responses. So what they say is these males, they accept divergence from the local pattern still, and they still perceive those animals as a threat to their territory. And now the females. So this is female responses, solicitation population displays. They respond to their own, and if it's only 34 kilometers away, then it's already a reduced response. So this made them suggest that the females are much more discriminatory, and maybe true in general as well. But it is a very different text, of course, and so it is very hard to say. But I think it's nice that they succeeded in getting some sort of insight. It's very hard in absolute sense to compare males and female responses because it's a very different assay. But in most studies, especially the ones that I did, I always have to add one or two paragraphs in which I say, yeah, I have the male response, but in the females it could be the same or not, and then I have to argue around that I don't have any insight in what females do. So that's why I turn this up. I don't think their data are perfect, and that's what we want, but I think it's one of the best sets. So what, in terms of the theory that I was testing together with Tom Smith in 10 years ago now, is that, well, if you have divergent selection in different habitat types on physiology and morphology, at the same time you have that on song, you can get kind of an ecological link that it may be critical to speciation events. So this is happening at the same time and may be independent. may be independent, may also be dependent, because we also know if you have selection on bill shape and bill morphology, like in the Darwin finches has been found by Jeff Polos, then that may also inherently lead to changes in your acoustic structure. So, independent or not, this may guarantee a link, and that may indicate a signal to the female. Because in the song sparrows or in the white-crowned sparrows, you have all these dialect studies, but typically those animals were in the same habitat. And so I think it would be critical, whether it's a dialect species or not, to look at whether these birds have been selected for in different habitats, and then it makes sense for females to be discriminatory. And it makes sense to males to be defending a territory to somebody that's also adapted to the local habitat. And that may be critical for reproductive isolation. So the species I worked on for quite a while was the little green bull. And this is its distribution. We only went to Cameroon. Tom Smith, he visited Cameroon many times, and he got genetic data of this bird, and I will show you a little bit about it. And then he said, well, we have a lot of interesting data, but we don't have the song, so we need somebody to work on that. And I was just finishing my PhD at that time, and so I was very happy to do that. But then it happened to be that he sent me out to study the songs of the most complex singer in Africa, I think, so I'll tell you a little bit about it. First, Africa is very nice. This is rainforest in the south, and all the way up you get into desert-like habitat in the north, so it's lots of different habitat zones are there. And so that is a very nice and unique study situation. These are some of the, this is trying to make the songs of the little ringle easy to you, 4 different extractions of a series that is, because it's singing continuously, and it sings these kind of what I call song classes, song types, in sequences. So I called this one with kind of chucks, number 1, this is 2, which is always ending with kind of a trill, like you saw the rufous crowned sparrow, and then there's this one, which is escalating short warble, always escalating with some high notes, and this is the longest one, and this is actually much longer, a sequence of very complex notes. So, chucks, number 2. And this is done in sequences, and especially this particular escalation in notes, that's when you, anywhere where you go in the rainforest, in the distribution, that you immediately hear that as a human observer, and you know, oh, little green was present. That's a typical bird of many habitats. But what I found out is that if you have one individual, it may sing 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. Well, it's a little distortion here, but then it goes on 1, 2, 3, 4. But there's other ones that say 4, 2, 3, 1, 4, 2, 3, 1, 1, 4, 2, 3, 1. And I looked at it, I thought, hey, it looks like kind of a sequence dialect, because I heard that birds that were in the same area were doing things more similar to each other than they were doing elsewhere. And so what I looked at is 6 populations in the rainforest, and here there's a kind of a boundary, and there are 6 populations in gallery forest. And here you see a dendrogram of similarity, and you see which populations are, in terms of the sequence, more similar to each other. And what you then see is, well, the sequence 3, 4, 2, 1 is sung in populations 1, 11, and 10. Well, 11 and 10 are here, close to this side, and also there. So you see that that's going across the boundary of different habitat types. And I was interested in finding differences. But I also thought, hey, these are sequence differences, and in terms of transmission, it doesn't matter whether you've seen A, B, or B, A. Same frequency, same temporal pattern. So I thought, hey, this is my environmentally neutral trait. And I indeed found clear evidence that it's really something like a divergent by distance thing, and that proximity tells you which ones are most similar, because then number 6, number 9, so there is, and I was thinking like there's lots of trucks coming out of this area, so the forest is broken open in a particular way, and you get these patterns that also the birds will use for dispersal. And I thought to see all sorts of patterns, and these populations here in the north, and there's this set that you see over there, and then we have 7 and 12, the more deep forest areas over there that they are clustering here together. So you see patterns of proximity here, and it's not necessarily related to the boundary of different habitat types. Here you see the data that Tom Smith had collected on the little rebus, and he was comparing well, body weight, wing length, build depth, some examples, and he had shown that these birds, they were definitely either habitat, they were definitely one species, and there was still high levels of gene flow going on. But what you see here is that the birds do differ in the rainforest in yellow and in the ecotone in purple, and they're actually a little bit bigger in the ecotone. And their wing length is especially longer, and they have a different build depth. So the wing length, it's more open habitat, so indeed the wings may be adapted from our open habitat. And also build depth may be related to different seeds or berries they forage on. And then I matched that with the song data, and I also found various differences that were really related to the habitat. So here you see the minimum frequency, maximum frequency, and the delivery rate of the song. All were highly significantly different between the two sites. And not always in the expected direction, because if you have bigger birds here, you would think that they may sing at a lower frequency, but that was not the case. And so I didn't think it was a morphologically driven difference. And it was also not always very consistent, because what you see here is that in the rainforest they sing at lower frequencies, but also they answer at higher frequencies. So they had a wide frequency range. And there is a difference in delivery rate. So we were kind of puzzled. Okay, what is it? Is it transmission? Is it body weight size? Is it ambient noise? The clear differences. And we confirmed what Tom wanted us to find out, that indeed, despite gene flow, there's divergence in both the morphology and the song, and that is what we predict may be key to ecological speciation. These birds are in contact, and they may not respond to each other because the song indicates where a bird is from. Well, here you see the same picture I showed you before, but now also the picture how that is in the gallery forests. You see that there's a clear difference. Especially in this zone, there are no cicadas, no big insects there. There's only in the middle of the day when it's heated up, you get insects making sounds, but which are really high up, above 6 kilohertz, which is above the range of the little ringle, so that has no impact on it. But you do see some dove species over here in the lower area, and actually, yeah, especially in the lower area, it was quiet throughout the day in the rainforest. So I thought, okay, these are crude patterns, but maybe the rainforest little ringles, they are driven to lower frequencies, especially because here there is lots of sound. So the habitat-dependent differences, they were most clear in this high-pitched frequency. So here you see the number 3, the escalating song of ecotone birds, and you don't have this really high-pitched thing that was so typical of the rainforest. Anywhere you go, you have this really escalating wobble, and that is, well, it's escalating in loudness. You see loud, dark notes here, but it's lacking this higher pitched thing. So that it's kind of an absence there. And I thought, okay, let's look into more detail, and I did it together with Alex Michel. He was kind of the follow-up postdoc at Tom Smith's lab. And if you look at these patterns, like some noise only in the high frequency regions, and this is the pattern in the rainforest, it's relatively quiet here, lots of noise here, but there's also this slit. You just saw this big insect there. If you accumulate lots of these sonograms, you get this, and indeed there is kind of an empty niche for this spectrum. That's all up again. And so the acoustic divergence may be driven by habitat-dependent masking. And Alex Michel, he thought, okay, I'll look for this in more detail, and I tried to get a replicate, not within the country, but in Uganda. And that was, of course, very nice, because the main question that people have for long been looking into is it that rainforest refugia play a role in divergence and speciation, or can ecology by itself already be enough for speciation? And so is this critical to have segregation geographically, or within one area the ecological gradient is more of a driving force in terms of speciation? It doesn't need to be one or the other. Of course they can both contribute, but as often happens in literature, you get a polarization. Some people are for or against this. So this is the map of sites that were visited after Alex went to all sites. So many more sites in Cameroon. And so from here, this is the ecotone sites. And here you see the refugium in Western Africa and the refugium in Eastern Africa. This is Uganda, and you see also rainforest sites here, and this is all the ecotone sites. And so this was a nice opportunity to really put this at test. And here you see some sonogram examples, and Alex was, this is the Cameroon's examples that they already showed you, and here are some examples from the rainforest. You can see any sonogram has also the noise bands through them, but immediately you should see that there's a wide note, a different shape, but that may vary per location. But in the forest, again, they have the high pitch, and it's kind of on top of, again, like a layer of sound here. You see that here as well, and there's nothing there, and it's relatively low as well. So indeed, the habitat difference in maximum frequency in that song type 3 especially were consistent also for Uganda. And then what he did, and I didn't do any playbacks when I was there, and he said, okay, now we have opportunity to really put this at the test, because what we can do is we can have birds in ecotone, let them respond to birds from the rainforest, which is not that far away, and compare it to ecotone songs from really far away, but which is from the same habitat type. And so that's what Alex did. And so here you see the approach distance as a general measure of response strength. And this is the data from Cameroon in the ecotone. And the response to Cameroon ecotone, Cameroon forest, and Uganda ecotone. And you see, well, actually, it was an exciting question, but the answer was very though they didn't respond any differently to any of them. So, no, there's no discrimination. And then he did the same in Uganda. And, well, to the Cameroonian ecotone, there was definitely lots of variations. Sometimes they didn't respond, but no significant differences either. So we're consistent across the continent. Ecotone birds that didn't discriminate. And so that was the sad part of the story. But he did all these playbacks, rainforest and ecotone for each other. So I tell it in this way because there was some interesting aspects. This is no discrimination in ecotone between own population versus nearby other habitat or far away own habitat. But this is the results from the rainforest. And then what you see is that there is a discrimination against the ecotone songs. So they lack, for what we know, there may be many more differences, but those high-pitched notes, and they respond significantly less to Cameroon ecotone, whereas there's no significant difference between Uganda forest, rainforest and Cameroon rainforest. And nicely so, that was also matched by the data in Uganda. So again, the Uganda rainforest birds, they discriminate against Uganda ecotone birds. And there's no significant difference, again, more variation, but no significant difference between the birds. So they kind of recognize faraway birds from the same habitat, but they discriminate against nearby birds from another habitat. And this is what you would predict if ecology plays a role in speciation. Some may be driving population apart. Except for this tiny thing of complication, that it's an asymmetrical thing. One population is discriminating and the other is not. It may affect gene flow, but in what way? It may mean that there is some kind of sex-dependent dispersal going on. That is as far as we got in Africa, so we move on to the other continent. The other little brown creature this time with a nice eye stripe, those are the grey-breasted wood wrens that we have been working on in Ecuador for quite a few years with Caroline Dingle. She did her PhD work on this in Oxford. Sorry, Cambridge. And I can make that joke here, but I don't think it I appreciate it. And we continued working with Daniel Cadena in Colombia on another set of subspecies of this wood wren. And this is Wouter Halbeck. he went with me as a supervisor, and I sent him off to study hummingbirds. And then after a couple of weeks, he didn't find any hummingbirds. And I said, well, Caroline Dingle is coming to the country, so wait, and then you'll work on wood wrens. And so he did, and that worked out really nicely. So what you find there is an elevational gradient from low tropical woodlands, rainforest, up to the temperate elfin forest. So really scrub-like trees, cloudy all the time. Very nice. And you get two subspecies, which are segregated on the elevation. So we get Hilaris downhill and Leucophis at a higher elevation. And they sing quite differently. So here's two sonograms. And I drew a line in the middle here because you see that again there is a pitch difference, so a frequency change. So at high elevation they also sing at high frequencies. You really hear that it's high pitched notes. And this is the other one. And you should hear the song, but you should hear some more. This is typical for the rainforest at low elevation. Again, lots of insects. At low elevation it's warmer, it's a more complex community, so many more insects. So there is a lot of noise. And this is very consistent. So this is a sampling of different populations. So throughout Ecuador, we have samples of Hilaris and of Leucophis. And you see always, in the high elevation population, you see high-pitched songs. And here you see no high-pitched notes. And so that's very clear across Ecuador. And while I added this and Colombia, two different subspecies, the genetic material that they started a little bit long ago was completely different. Throw them on the mountain, and you get a split up into different frequency range uses. So that was quite nice. And if you look at it, well, this is a drier and warmer habitat, and this is within the elfin forest, wet and cold. And especially cold is probably critical because now we've done gradients with activity, and you get, well, insects really stop producing sound. Sometimes you have some frogs popping up, literally, for a while, but it gets really quiet and silent in those foggy habitats. And if you look at this, and you look at one of the major sound producers there, you really see an incredible mesh between the presence of those notes and or the absence of those notes. So it may be strongly associated, it is strongly associated with the high levels of high frequency ambient noise. So again, we asked the question, what about response levels? Do these wood wrens recognize words from their own habitat like the little green goose did? We tested this way. Here you see the Andes, it has two chains with the Inter-Andean Valley, and Quito is here in the middle. Very sometimes scary imagining with your plane over there at high elevation. And this is the other slope, and then it goes down into the Amazon over here. And so they are on the slopes of the Andes only. And here you have Leucophis at high elevation, and this is low elevation Hilaris, and there is some low mountains on the coast, and that's kind of segregated from these slopes because this is all habitat that's either low or urbanized, and so they are not occurring there. So we tested Hilaris in a parapatric population and in an allopatric population, and also Leucophis in allopatry and in allopatry and parapatry. And what we did, again, similar to what we do with the little green bulls, and we played back in this population nearby other subspecies or far away own subspecies. So it's not a familiarity thing. If you find response differences which are just related on proximity, or then you would expect that they would respond to the other subspecies stronger because they're closer. So we always try to get that confounding variable out. And the other way around, we took them over the mountain, only the songs, and played them back over here to their own subspecies and compared it to the nearby other subspecies. Well, here you have it from the side to show you the results, and it's not as surprising anymore now I've told you the little green bull story, because what's happening here on the coast, they respond to everything very strongly. To their own subspecies, but also to the other subspecies. If you get here on the slope, they respond to everything. Even birds that are from the other side, they respond to everything. But again, the exciting thing is here. An incredible asymmetry here. And well, there's many things to say about this. What you see here is that on the other side of the slope, they will never meet the other subspecies, but they discriminate against it strongly. But the strongest discrimination is here. And so we have done many experiments. This is only one, and an experiment is 20 trials. But we have done that, I think, now in total in different areas in that area, maybe 6 times 20 trials, and they never respond to this. If we have a control species, like just another common species in the environment, and there's as much activity to another random species as there is to this other subspecies, which they can meet, because it's only a few hundred meters away. And the territories, they are boundary territories. So you see there's strong discrimination, and here there is no discrimination. So very strong asymmetrical pattern. So indeed it may affect gene flow, but in what way? And the asymmetric pattern has now been found in many more situations. So whether it's subspecies or species doesn't matter too much. And taxonomically it's fine with whatever people decide. But in terms of mechanism, it may be very widespread that this is taking place. And what determines whether you're discriminatory or the indifferent species? So there is, again, this nice pattern. So Wouter went back for a second time, because we really wanted to find out what's going on. And we know a little bit more now. And this has been on the shelves for a while yet. So we have not published this yet, but it is actually quite interesting. So again, you recognize the allopatric population, so we call that now 1 and 7. But we went into more detail and split this up in different populations. And 4 is the population where you have the adjacent territories. And then we have 5 and 6 on the slope. We did genetic markers, so we got blood samples, AFOP analysis, just to see what's going on, whether there is hybridization going on or not, and where we would find patterns of integration. And so what you see here is first more detail about acoustics. And if you look at the songs, and there is differences in variation within populations, but up to population 4, you suddenly get a mixture, but the mixture is not acoustically, because they remain different. We did find mixed singers. Occasionally they sing a song of the other, but if they sing a song of the other, it's not an intermediate song. Now it's a song that's completely like the others. Then they incorporate, for example, those high-pitched notes occasionally, and it's a real match of the songs that are sung by their neighbor. But differences remain. And here you see what's happening. Now there is evidence for hybridization here. So this is a subset of almost 100, so you can see that this is about close to 20 birds were found here that were not full parental species and probably in F1. They were all males. Nicely matching with what people would expect. And, well, for the rest it's a mixture. A little information about introgression. So it's a relatively sharp edge in terms of genetics. There is some leakage going on, and there is some hybridization going on. But, I mean, you saw the picture of it, they are very similar. They are, at this site, in the same habitat. But there is something that's keeping them from hybridizing at a large scale. So many answers, but also many questions still, of course. So the summary is divergence in song morphology despite gene flow in the little ring pool. Spectral divergence is possibly related to noise profile. Those were crude patterns, and actually I think more crude and more stuff to find out, I think, in the little ring pool than in the wood wren. And the discrimination of the songs from other habitats in the rainforest only, not in the ecological. And it's a very different set of species, but similar story. Maintenance of divergence in song despite the contact zone. And spectral divergence is very likely related to the noise profile. And discrimination of songs from other at a high elevation. So asymmetry, but with a song that is learned for both species, we think they are learned. We have evidence of mixed singers, And then when they copy the song of the other subspecies, they are very accurate copies, so they're completely able to do that. But in the field, you can put your tent in between a bird that sings one song and the other side you have the other one, and there's no or little introgression. So you may ask questions now. I have still many questions, but you may ask questions now. Thank you very much. Anybody? Puzzling, isn't it? So Tom Smith has always been the motor behind the project, and Alex has followed up on many different projects, and especially on the Little Green Book. And Wouter has then came to me to do a PhD on the great hits in Leiden on urban work, and had now gone back to work in the tropics in Panama on the bats and the frogs of Mike Ryan. Yeah.
I don't have any question, but a commentary from my experience in Panama. There were howler monkeys shouting at 6 in the morning, and special species of cicada starting at 9:50 every day.
Yeah, very strong tempo patterns in there. Yeah, yeah. It was very interesting. I had 2 students in Colombia last year. I was a bit nervous about sending 2 beautiful girls on the road to Colombia, and then but I had found a research station which was very nice, and I thought, okay, that looks very safe. And then the first messages I got were like, oh, we're not allowed into the research station, there were all sorts of problems, but we'll find a place to stay. And I said, okay. And then I didn't hear for 2 months, I think, from them, and which was quite scary. But they worked out really well. They had a nice study. But one thing they were afraid of, and that was not what I was afraid of, was there was a growling animal nearby, and they asked about tigers or pumas, and yeah, there's puma. But they were the howler monkeys, and they had been for weeks afraid of howler monkeys. And that's always, oh, no, there, those are the monkeys. But it is quite a dramatic sound, and they can be loud.
You showed a paper showing the different sex differences in reaction to songs. How rare is it? I mean, this study, you said there is not many. How many kind of rare?
I don't think I need 2 hands for that. So it is really rare. And obviously what happens is that once you have those studies, they become very unnatural, because people have to take words from the field, because in the field it's impossible to get responses. And actually, I mean, the story on the wolfhound is much more complicated, and maybe actually have advantages as well, because these are duetting species. I didn't tell you, but we analyzed so far only the male songs, and we avoided the duetting. The males sing the same song during the duet, but then the female is also going through. And so it's much more difficult to analyze. And what we have analyzed is we see no differences between the songs. So in terms of geographic variation, it's fine. But obviously it's very interesting what's going on with the females. And we have done now analysis also on female songs, but I don't know whether we find the same patterns yet. But for other studies, there is some stuff done in the US on taking some reeds birds into the lab. They quite often have to stimulate them, either with some estradiol or to stimulate. I think last time what I saw is they showed images of solicitation, population solicitation displays of their own species, and that females became kind of receptive. We have studies on canaries. Those are maybe the most easy to get into some kind of mood that they will show with receptivity. So it becomes artificial. And then in our own lab, we have work on like zebra finches, where you can let them press buttons and then preference for one song or the other. So yes, it is possible, but canaries and zebra finches are the easiest. And if you want any random species outside, bring it inside. First, you have to keep it alive, and then you try to see whether they do that test as well. So it has not been done that often at all. And And so not in this kind of context, we have some studies on roost ground sparrows, which is also in ecological context, pattern et al. In 2004, they had males and females. Not a terribly big data set, but they just got out what was needed, I think. So there is also a female response, but it's very limited. So work to do. Find your set.
In the forest, they discriminated against those from the woodlands, and they were the ones with the high-pitched notes. And the same was with the highlands, they had the high-pitched notes, and the lowlands they didn't.
Yeah, there's definitely questions.
So you think that they discriminate because they produce this unique note and the others they don't do it? Or what is the asymmetry in this case, or in these two cases? Because one of the sets has something unique and the others they don't have.
Yeah.
So you think that this is the driver why one direction discriminates and the other?
Well, there's many causes. You can have it because mechanistically or perceptually or evolutionarily. And so one thing is that if you produce the wide frequency song, then you cover the range of the other plus something extra. And if you don't have that, you have a range which is limited. It misses something. So that may actually be something. And that's one explanation. I don't believe it actually, because.
But for me, this is the obvious one.
It was, yeah, that is perceptually. Yeah. So, but I mean, now I've done so many playbacks and birds, they recognize songs, and I don't think the details of the frequencies or where are so they recognize whether it's their own species or not, whether it's a neighboring species or not. And I believe any difference in response, especially if it's as strong and consistent as what we see here, is related to what they have learned about responding to those songs. They recognize those songs and they don't respond. And because I think even because they are still similar to some extent, and so they're really discriminating. They're not responding less or so because it's less like. Now this is definitely the case. It may be the case on the other side of the mountain, and that is a lower similarity and gradually responding less. But I think on the west slopes, they are recognizing and they are discriminating. And so whether that has, I don't think it has to do with range coverage or so. And they recognize them also, but without, we should do a test without, but I think if you take that high-pitched one out, I think they will still discriminate against them. There's something worrying them, I think.
Because you only showed two examples, so
yeah.
In one case it was discrimination from forest to the other side, and in the other from high mountain to low. And I'm trying to understand this asymmetry, but I think I can do it.
No, but you got it. So that's definitely the picture. I mean, every playback that we have, of course, is not a song, and you do it around in other territories. So we have a very similar design throughout. It's always 20 territories. And we have 10 songs of one and 10 songs of the other, and we use each 10 twice. And so we have to cover the variation that's available there, and the differences are really consistent. And so what you can get, if you get like an intermediate response level, that means that everybody has intermediate response strength, or you have that half of them is responding and the other half is not. But if you have something like this, then nobody is responding, and none of them is responding to the other. And that really points at discrimination. And it is indeed related to that frequency range. We have not really an explanation. We have some more detailed information about the matching. And what I said, we have done female song analysis, and we really know the pairs. And so in that population 4, what you see is that there's sometimes mixed singers. And we have one example, which is one of the hybrid. We have the hybrid males in that songs, and they're one or the other. And we have one bird that is genotyped as Hilaris and is singing a Leatherfish song.
I think that if they would sing something in between, it would be just a waste of effort.
That's a waste of effort. So you're one or the other, and that's.
But not that kind of.
Yeah. So the pattern that we get there is that there is they can copy accurately. They can sing like the other, and we've tried to stimulate them to switch while we want it. That didn't happen. So I think they have learned, and then they stick to what they sing. But there's not a clear impact. And it may explain some of the leakage. But then, why is it not like completely emptying the buckets? I mean, why just on leakage? Whereas, what is keeping them from them? Is it indeed the discrimination of one of the subspecies that's keeping this boundary so strict? It's a puzzle, and it's nice as a puzzle because it looks like it's a more general pattern. And we have a couple of more examples now, very different systems, or at species level in white-breasted and gray-breasted bull trends. I believe there's another nice study showing exactly the same asymmetry, and so it's
strange that the common pattern seems to be this asymmetry. It doesn't really
doesn't make sense. No, not yet. Not yet.
In tropics, there's often males and females defend territory together. And I believe that, for example, it would be easier to test females in tropics distribution. For example, in those two species.
Yeah. Well, Caroline Dingle has studied them in more detail, not only for the speciation issue, but especially also for the duetting function. It may be more easy, but not much more easy, because what's happening is typically you can never have, you should, I mean, there's some studies, what's the name again, there's studies on capture, removal experiments, and that's the only way you can get a proper female response that you can do, because the male will respond anytime. He's always there. And so you get, what she did is she played back female song, or male song, or a duet, and she was looking at the responses of males or females and whether they're different. And so they definitely, a female is not responding when there's only a male song. She will respond when there's a female present, so in the female song or the duet. But a female is never allowed to respond on her own. As soon as she starts in, there's no solo female song in the response, because one song and the male will also be on top and duet. And so, and the male will respond to anything that you play back. And so that's also what typical, I mean, if you do in temperate zones, sometimes you see also a female coming along, a little bit behind, and then, and so even though they're not singing, then they also tend to be present in a proportion of your playbacks. But that will not be an easy situation. I think if you catch the male, keep it like a few hundred meters away, then do a male playback song or female, whatever you want to test. You get a female response that you can interpret. It's an artificial condition, but it may happen like that. And then you can, after an hour or so, you can release the male again. So I think that's the thing I would like to do with but that's doable in other species as well. But you know this one is singing, so you get the same type of response, which is an additional advantage in terms of response. Yeah. Any more questions?